Hello again. We've been joined today by some different flowers. I think the daffodils have probably died of boredom. Perhaps we should have got some cactuses. They'd probably be more interested in sun. Pretty well all the videos we've done so far have been based on running tracks at a saturated water content. About 25%, again, that magic figure of the weight of the dry sand is water when a track is saturated. And I think the reason for that is because that's how most tracks are run. They run at around about the 25% because if you keep putting water on the track, that's what you will end up with. As the water drains through the sand, you'll end up with a 25% water content. Now, we did some interesting experiments the other day where we were testing water meters to see how well they worked. And I've previously spent quite a long time telling people that water meters are a complete waste of time. Moisture meters, I should say. But in fact, what we found was we produced an interesting set of results where we plotted the resistance measured by the moisture meter against the water content of the track that we knew it to be by adding ever-increasing amounts of water, 5% at a time. And we found there was a fairly dramatic effect of adding the first 10% of the water in terms of the resistance. The graph leveled out, and then you got to about the 25% point, which is saturation. It varies a bit from sand to sand, but it's usually around 25%. Now, for want of a better description, I've decided to call this section of the graph moist, this section waterlogged, and this critical point here saturated. Once you get, don't forget, into waterlogged sand, we've discovered that it actually changes its behaviour spectacularly. The sand particles start to be able to move freely within the water, and as the water drains through a waterlogged sand track, it encourages consolidation. The more water you put on that track, the more it drains through, the more consolidation of the sand you get. So, having spotted this, it occurred to me that perhaps, just perhaps, some people are running the tracks in this kind of area. If anyone is, and they are doing that on a regular basis and they're knowingly doing that, then please let me know, because I'd be very interested. But it is possible that the sand may be more handleable in what you might call a safe operating area, to borrow an engineering term, which I reckon would be around about the 12 to 20% saturation mark. So in other words, 25% being saturated. So we thought we'd test this out. Now, in the last video, you could see the different sand constituency having added the water. So today what we're going to do, I'm going to add 16% water to this sand sample, which is currently dry. That's going to put us about here on the graph line, into this stable zone. And you can see that if the resistance is a true measure of what the sand is doing, you could vary the water content quite a lot either way and not make any difference. But I'm going to add 16%. Another thing, just as an aside, just to have a look at here as I add 16% water, is how the water does compact the sand as you add it, even on this sample. If I just tip the water in, you can see how the sand actually shrinks to some extent. Now, what we'll do is stir that in and mix it well in. The advantage of running a track at saturation is probably that, in theory, you know the water content, because if you saturate a track in water, then all the sand is going to have the same water content, and it's going to be about 25%. The downside of running at less than that is that you have to mix the water in. It will drain through the sand, but it won't. It would be very difficult unless you use something like a sprinkler system, and that may be why some of the older tracks did have sprinkler systems. They may have actually been running the tracks in a different way. So unless you have that, you have to add the water and then make sure you actually mix it into the sand. So that's a problem between races, because if you add water between races, you've got to at least harrow, probably down to at least a couple of inches, to make sure that the water is evenly spread. It's possible that this is where some of the confusion arises in tracks about the way people tell you to manage them. So many conflicting bits of advice, and it may be that some of those bits of advice have applied to people using tracks with less than the saturation point of water. Some people have been using tracks, if you like, in the moist zone, and those tracks have behaved differently, and that may be where some of the conflicting advice has come from. It is quite difficult to mix that amount of water evenly, but there's an obvious advantage. Although when you saturate a track, you know that the track has an even amount of water on it. that is then immediately influenced by the quality of drainage. If you have good quality drainage, consistent good quality drainage over a whole track, then okay, the water will drain out quite rapidly and you'll end up with your 25% content. However, that's an ideal that I don't think probably ever occurs in real life. At least some of the drains will be blocked or reduced flow, and in those areas that track will stay wetter for longer. And that's quite significant, because I think one of the things we've seen is that the more the longer the track stays waterlogged for, the more consolidation of the sand you get and the harder the track becomes. Now, the other reason I think possibly tracks have been run like that in the past is on the face of it, it seems easier, but also because it makes the surface hard, and that makes for a fast track, and that makes for headline grabbing times for dogs. The ultimate extension, if you wanted to carry on running a track like that, of course, would be to run dogs on concrete, but obviously the compromise has to be that you're going to get a lot of injuries, and that's why we don't do that. So let's just see how that sand compacts down now. So basically what you've done, you've added water, you've harrowed the track to mix the water content in, and now you're compacting it down. I don't think you need a lot of compaction, to be honest. I think probably rolling it. Again, some tracks have used rollers in the past. They don't seem to be used these days. But that probably would be all you need. Downside, possibly, where the tractor tyres run, where the water bowser runs, would be that that area gets more compaction. The other most important point with this is, in theory, with a track running at 16% saturation, you don't actually need drains, because if I add more water to that now, it will be absorbed into the sand. None of it will get into the drains. It's only when we exceed this magic 25% that water will flow through the sand into the drains. The problem with running a track at saturation, though, is that inevitably it will start to dry out. If you then add more water to get to that level, for a period of time, the sand in that track will be waterlogged. So you will get this consolidation. Now, the time that that happens for is going to be very dependent on the drainage of the track. In areas that are well drained, it'll be quick. It'll be a matter of minutes before the water drains through that sand, and you're left with your 25%. In areas where the drainage is slower, it could be considerably longer, and what you may find is that you may water your track, waterlog it for a period of time, and when the dogs run on that track, it's actually waterlogged. The next race is waterlogged. You don't then water the track and you go on to the next race, so that may be 40 minutes later, say, and that track at that point has gone to saturation point. It's no longer waterlogged, and so the track will behave quite differently between two different races, two consecutive races on the same day. Essentially, they're running on a different track. Your other problem, if you want to find out if a track is waterlogged, then obviously look for water on the surface, look for water pooling in the paw prints from the dogs. If you're uncertain, get a thick pen, not a pencil preferably, push that into the sand. You will see water pooling in the bottom of the hole at the depth of the water table currently in the sand. Now, the other problem with saturating your track and then putting water on and waterlogging it is that the water will drain unevenly according to the drainage, and that causes patchy sand. If you add water and it starts to drain through, the water will soften the surface of the track. This is why people add water, because they think the track is too hard. So they add water, it waterlogs the surface becomes soft, but it's unstable. Those sand particles can move. They move in response to slow movement, the paws moving with the power off as the paw touches the ground, but they're rock hard in response to impact, because the sand particles can't get out of the way quick enough. It's what's called a colloid. There's videos that demonstrate that. Now, that's a very similar principle to water skiing, where the water ski moves over the water. If you stop, you sink. But if you're moving over the surface of the water, you're pushing water molecules out of the way, and they can't get out of the way fast enough, so they actually support the weight of the skier on the surface. That's what happens when the dog's paw hits at high speed into a waterlogged track. It's no longer soft. It appears soft when you walk around it. It appears soft when you push a pencil into it or your fingers. It's rock hard if it's hit at speed. So that's why some of the testing processes that you go through are deceived. So if you add water to your sand to saturate it and accidentally waterlog it afterwards, the water starts to drain through. What you have then is a soft surface layer and a hard lower layer where the water hasn't reached. The water continues to drain through. You end up with a soft top layer still, and a soft lower layer now as the water is drained to the lower levels. Water continues to drain, but of course if it drains slowly, then the top drains first, and that will leave you with a hard surface layer over a soft lower layer. So you can end up with all combinations. You can end up with a soft on soft, a hard on soft, and a soft on hard. And it all depends on your drainage. Worse than that, that will be inconsistent across the track. You'll have areas that are soft, hard, soft, any combination you like, over different areas of the track. And even worse than that, if you put water on the track and it's waterlogged, you walk around that track, patches of the track will be different. If you walk around 20 minutes later where the water's continued to drain out, the track surface will have actually changed. Those patches that had a soft surface will probably have a hard surface by then. They may have a soft underneath or a hard underneath. So your track will be not only inconsistent in terms of the quality of the surface as you walk around it will be inconsistent almost minute to minute, race to race. This is clearly a major problem. It may not be the way we should be running tracks. 16% water in this, we could measure that with a moisture meter, subject to the limits of the accuracy of moisture meters, most of all the addition of salt. Brings me on to another point. This track contains a lot less water than the saturated track. It's probably a lot easier to defrost it and break it up and use it again by driving over it repeatedly if it freezes, because it's the water that holds most of the cold, if you like, in a track. Having said that, because there's less water in it, it probably freezes quicker. Having said that, you would probably need a lot less salt to stop it freezing. So there are many advantages of running a track at this level. How do you keep it at 16%? Well, what if it rains? It's not as bad as you think. If you have 6 millimeters of rain, that's a quarter of an inch in old money, as most of us probably still use. That equates to about 8,000 litres over the surface area of a track. I'll put that calculation in the description in the video. That's probably 1 or 2 Bowsers full, depending on how big your Bowser is. And that increases the water content of that by 3.5%. So if you start at 16%, one reasonably heavy shower of rain, 6 millimeters, quarter inch, will take you up to 19.5%. Another one will take you up to 23%. So 2 heavy showers and you're still within your 25% limit of saturation. What happens if it dries out? How long does it take to dry it? That is a way of, if your track is saturated, of course, of getting the water content down, is to get it to dry. I didn't think evaporation from sand was all that great, but I left a sample overnight for 24 hours outside yesterday. The minimum temperature during the day was 2 degrees, maximum 6 degrees, hardly any wind. There was a little bit of weak wintry sunshine on the surface during the day. And that sample in that space of time, 24 hours, lost 10% of its water content. Now, imagine on a hot summer's day how quickly you lose water from your sand in the sunshine. Again, it's going to be different over different areas of the track. That brings you to the point that perhaps we should be applying different amounts of water over different areas of the track. It's certainly theoretically possible to do that technologically, obviously more complex than just driving around with your Bowser or even using sprinklers. But it can be done. The thing is, probably during the summer months, and we're going to do some videos on summer tracks because we have yet to explore why they tend to become more dangerous in the summer. But over the summer months, you could maintain your water content around about the 16% by, probably wouldn't last a whole afternoon. You probably would have to add water to the track at some point during the afternoon. Unfortunately, you probably have to hoe it afterwards, but your aim would be to compensate the effect of evaporation and actually maintain your water. I would imagine, I don't know, it's worth experimenting. I would imagine if you get much below 12%, the track probably changes its behaviour and probably becomes unusable. I think if you're going to do this, it probably does require some fairly precise control. Now, how is this surface? We've made up 16% sand, we've hoed it and we've rolled it. I don't know. We need to test this on a bigger scale. This experiment we're doing live, I don't know the results of this, so we'll see. Certainly on slow pressure, what's the resistance? Let me just compact that down again. One of the tests I've been using before is a pencil to try and simulate the resistance to movement through the sand, try and simulate what happens when the pour takes off. So we do that. Seems pretty good to me, actually. Just compact that down again. Okay, the other thing is impact resistance. It needs give. The sand needs to go somewhere when the paw hits it. That's the only way you'll get a bit of give in the surface of the sand. So we've got to test the impact resistance. Seems pretty good. Again, we won't know till we try it on a real dog, on a real track with real paws. But compared to the samples, say, where we had the waterlogged tracks where I nearly broke my fingers when I did that, that actually looks quite good. I'm thinking this might be the way to run tracks. It needs a bit more care, and as I say, people might already be doing it, and I hope they are. What you don't get though, if I just try and pat that down a bit and then do the same tests, that's really quite forcibly compacted, and just see now, again, you've got movement there. The sand can move when a paw hits that, because as I say, that's the only way you'll get give, if the sand particles can move. When you put water on, it consolidates the sand, probably by washing the smaller particles in amongst the bigger ones and actually getting the sand particles closer together. So let's just try that again. It's only harder, but there is give in it. The paw goes in, you've got resistance to movement as the paw takes off. It could be, as I say, that this is where the conflict of advice comes from. And even going back to freezing tracks, it may be that if you added salt to that directly, because your water content is already fairly low, you'll actually dry the track too much. And this may be where the idea of adding brine to tracks come from. We established that it doesn't work with saturated tracks, but it might be the best way to handle a track like this, actually to increase the water content with brine. So finally, just to demonstrate how, once again, I've done this a few times now, but it bears repetition, how water consolidates tracks. What we'll just do a bit of harrowing on this now. And I'm going to add water to bring the water content of this up to around about the 28% mark, I think, just over the saturation point. The other thing, if your track is too wet and you want it to evaporate quicker and dry quicker, obviously leave it harrowed and you increase the surface area there. And I would imagine, we'll do some tests on it, I haven't tried it, but I'd imagine that would dry much quicker than a compacted track. So this water's slightly less than I've already added, which took it up to 16%. This is going to take it up to about 28%. And we'll see what effect that has. Just give that a wiggle. The wiggle simulates driving over it with a tractor. Now you can see what effect that's had on the sand. There's no drainage in my little pot here, so I can't demonstrate how that will gradually consolidate as the water runs through it. I've demonstrated that before, so I think we've covered that. Very dramatic, the effect of the water there. So I think this is probably the way we should be running tracks, and I think, backtracking on everything I've thought and said in the past, I think probably a moisture meter possibly could be useful in those situations, but to be fair, you can tell by feel you don't need a moisture meter, but if you want to use one, you've got to bear in mind the limitations of it as well. Food for thought. I would love comments on this, please. If anyone can send me some comments, that would be great, because, as I say, and particularly anyone who's already doing this, that would be brilliant. I would guess this is probably how we used to run tracks in the past, more than we now do. Thank you very much for watching.